Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 27 minutes before 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. I grew up on Long Island, New York, the Hudson River, the East River. They were not places you wanted to swim. The Bronx River. Oh, man, that was probably the worst. And then I moved here to Central Florida, and the water is just so beautiful. And I remember thinking, gosh, I too bad New York rivers can't be like this. And can we ever make them well again? And do you know, I understand from people I've spoken to or things I've looked at online that they are starting to make the waters a little bit better up there. I don't know. But I know it's beautiful here, and I would hate to see this water become that water. It would just be so horrible. Preston Roberts is on the phone. He is an attorney. He's also a fisherman, a hunter, a tree farmer, a third-generation Floridian, a University of Florida alumni, and the chief operating officer and the general counsel at the Florida Wildlife Federation. There is a lobbying effort he's on the phone to talk to us about to reauthorize the Land and Water Conservation Fund before it expires, which is not that far away, September 30th, 2018. No. So let's, this sounds like something we would need to be behind because, like I say, you don't want these waters or the land even to be corrupted. Is that a good word, Rob? Mm-hmm. Preston Roberts, good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning. How y'all doing?
I'm good. Where are you? Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Tallahassee.
Well, this sounds like something we need to be behind. Can you help us understand it?
I'm happy to. Land and Water Conservation Fund, most people have never heard of, but it actually was started back with Lyndon Johnson. And the thought was not to tax people for environmental efforts, but to use the royalties and revenues from federal water, oil, and gas exploration. So that's where this money comes from. It's not a tax on anybody. So the royalties that come in from big oil go into this fund, and they're used all over the country for environmental benefit.
And in what way? Is it research, or is it right hands-on cleaning, or what is it? And would it be different here in Central Florida than it might be for example, the rivers I was just referring to up in New York?
Excellent question. It's two things. One is acquisition, because like Post Springs, which is in Alachua County, north of where you are, was bought in part with Land and Water Conservation Fund monies. There's been a lot of projects all over this state for the last 50 years, and it's acquisition or development, and the development is getting public access to these places because they become public land. And the beautiful thing about it is the landowners, like it's land up and down a river that would be polluted by runoff if it wasn't in public hands. Those landowners voluntarily sell the rights to their property. This is not an eminent domain or for sale of any kind. Mm-hmm. And this is, you had mentioned about how the horrors I was looking up this morning. Again, I mean, the millions of fish that have now been killed by this red tide and what has been going on for years because of Lake Okeechobee and the lack of clean water flow south. We need to do something. And this is part of that answer, I think.
Oh, my gosh. And that's perfect. Can I ask you to explain that to me? I don't understand what causes that and how government, because there's a certain, and I'm not trying to make this political, but there is part of the news story that blames the governor's policies. I'll put it that way rather than putting it on the governor himself. Explain that to me, and I don't know if it's possible to do it without sounding political, but just to help us understand what exactly happens.
Well, I'm happy to not be political. We only have one state. No matter if you got an R or a D an I for independent, we only have one state to live in. So I'd like to think that this would be apolitical.
Absolutely.
Nobody wants to have green water in front of their home that they bought for a large amount of money, and now their property is worth a whole lot less because they're sitting on what is now sewage. And so I think we all have a stake in this, no matter how we're registered. Your question, and honestly, it's going back to Land and Water Conservation Fund, this program was supported by Republicans and Democratic administrations for the last 50 years. And so, like you were saying at the top of the show, it just needs to be reauthorized by September. And to make it permanent would be nice, too, so we don't have to have this battle again. Do you want me to speak about what I think the problems are in South Florida?
Well, if you could, as long as it's not over my head, if it's too scientific. Well, I mean, are we allowing people to do things like when I say people, I mean just me. I mean, am I being allowed to put too much fertilizer on my lawn, or does that need to be regulated more? Help us understand what we need to do.
Well, I think it's a whole bunch of things. You got to consider that most of South Florida, and not Ocala especially, but south of there is very low lying. So the seas are rising, and especially in Miami-Dade County, they've got king tides now flooding their water. So what you've got is a whole myriad of issues. You have saltwater intrusion because, the state is basically a big piece of Swiss cheese. We're all on karst, so the salt water goes underground and ruins our water supply when there's not enough fresh water to keep it out. That's one thing. That's a big concern of mine, is that the Everglades will become a salt marsh and not be fresh water anymore. But as far as what individuals can do, it's not necessarily the use of fertilizer. It's most people, and I could be blamed for this myself, overutilize it. I mean, all these plants that we have, the native plants were fine. It's when we bring in species that weren't really supposed to thrive here that we have to fertilize them.
I got
you. But if we fertilize them not quite as much and don't have the runoff, then that would be a big plus. As far as Lake Okeechobee, I'm sure y'all are aware of this, but the Kissimmee River flows basically north and south. From Orlando, it goes due south. And that's the main water source for this giant lake, Lake Okeechobee, which, honestly, I've been there. You can stand on one side of Lake Okeechobee and see the curvature of the earth. This thing is so huge.
Gosh.
But it was channelized in order to de-water the surrounding areas for development and for agriculture, without people thinking, well, what's the harm of that? Well, when they channelized it and made it 30 feet deep in a straight line, all the pollution from those surrounding areas just channeled right into Lake Okeechobee.
Okay.
And so it took many years, but we finally, I think it's probably the largest restoration effort in the state. I know that's for sure. But they're trying to put about 43 miles of that back, and they're making oxbows to slow the water down. If you slow the water down, a lot of that pollution drops out and goes into the submerged grasses, and so not all this pollution is being flushed into Lake Okeechobee.
Okay, and the red tide is caused by the pollution.
No, I'm not going to say that. The red tide, somebody else has said this, I'm not a scientist, but from what I read from the scientists, the red tide is, I've heard debates on whether, honestly, what they call over nutrification, in other words, too much phosphorus, too much nitrogen, going into these waters causes blooms, causes algal blooms. The green mats are feeding on this fertilizer.
Okay.
And when they feed on the fertilizer, it takes all the oxygen out of the water, and that's when you have these massive fish kills. That's simplistic, but that's how it happens.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say the red tide is somewhat of a different thing.
Oh, okay.
But the red tide is probably caused because the oceans are heating up, and that's been a straight line up for years. And we always have had red tides in this state ever since colonists got here in St. Augustine, but they've been every few years, and they weren't all that significant. Now we're having them all the time, and all I can think of is the increased water temperature and the excess fertilizer. So
if I could put it into my little metaphor of a car, when I have a problem with my car, I can bring it to the mechanic and pay him some money, and then my car is working again. And if I sit and talk to him, he'll explain it to me, and then maybe I'll understand it, maybe not. But the important thing for me is I found somebody who knew how to fix it and took it to him. Is that the same thing happening here? Like it's hard maybe for everybody to truly understand all the science behind what you do. But there are people like yourself and like the scientists you just referred to. I mean, so we need to pay attention to what they are saying and then let them do their job, just as I would let a mechanic fix my car. Am I right about that?
Yes, excellent metaphor. Yeah, absolutely. You listen to the people that know it. I mean, we've been studying what's going on in Florida for many, many years, and we need to utilize that knowledge. Interesting thing a lot of people don't know, and you kind of sound like you're not from Florida originally. In 1800, I believe there's a little over 500,000 people living in this state. I'm sorry, 1900. 1900. 120 about years. We're now, knocking on over 21 million.
Wow.
And so you can imagine the growth of this place, and it's continuing. And people are drawn here because of the climate and low taxes. And I understand all that, and that's great. But we can't kill the golden goose, and that's having a livable, beautiful place to live.
Well, it is beautiful, and I've said this forever. Well, I live in Ocala. I didn't move to Miami. And everybody wants growth all the time, but I always say, you know what? There are big cities already. Why don't we keep this one small and keep the big ones big, and then just kind of go where you feel comfortable. And it does affect the water. I mean, right here in Ocala, we have, I can't tell you this firsthand, but people who've been here longer than me will say, well, the Silver River used to be teeming with fish, and it was one of the attractions. You look under the water with the glass bottom boats, and you see bunches of fish. Not anymore. I mean, you see fish, but you don't see
like it was,
like you used to see in the old pictures. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I firsthand experienced the Silver Springs used to be a lot nicer. I mean, people say, "Wow, that's beautiful." It's dropped a lot from its former glory. Let's just say that. And that's not the only water body. I mean, it's just about every freshwater spring.
Yeah.
I don't know if you listeners. This state, north of Ocala, has more freshwater springs than any other place on the planet.
I bet it is beautiful. I mean, I've been to the one in Tallahassee. What's it called? WOCA?
WOCA, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is just so beautiful. There's not one that isn't beautiful. And so what do we do as voters, as people who are concerned? The Land and Water Conservation Fund. Do we write our state representatives? Who do we?
No, this is federal, so it would be your federal U.S. rep, yes, sir.
Okay.
So it'd be your United States representative, which I believe is Ted Yoho.
Right.
I guess he goes down into Marion County. I can't remember. But whomever your U.S. rep is, and of course Senator Rubio and Senator Nelson. Because, as you were saying, our time is running out to get this reauthorized. And I know it's unfortunate that people in D.C. are, fighting over just about everything. But I'd like to think that this one would be a no-brainer. It's not a tax on anybody, except for the oil companies. And I think they're making plenty. So, and it goes to serve not only us, but our children as well, and the economy of the state.
Does it contribute to fixing things when something goes wrong, like the deep what's called Deep Horizon?
Deepwater Horizon.
Yeah, that one. When something goes wrong like that, is that what part of this helps out to remedy?
Not this one. The Deepwater, not to get way specific on you, but the Deepwater Horizon one, the British Petroleum, BP, was found guilty, or they settled the case, and there's a huge amount of many millions of dollars of civil fines that are now being used to do projects around the Gulf of Mexico, all 5 states, and Florida's got some of that money. So that's what's going to be directed towards that effort. This effort, again, is a long-standing one to purchase land if the owners are willing, to protect springs, to protect up and down river corridors like the Santa Fe, Silver River, and also to make sure that the public can access them. Because I'm a big believer in, if people go out, it's like you were saying, you go out and see it, then you actually care about it. If you never see it, then you really don't. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, right.
So I'm a big believer in folks going and seeing and go, wow, I had no idea this was so cool.
And and that phrase, that operative phrase, their owners are willing. I mean, even in our community alone, we've got this huge cattle ranch that wants to take all of this water to just, sustain their cattle. And then you've got this runoff from the excrement of the cattle going back into the springs. And then you've got their second section, which is a water bottling plant, which wants to keep withdrawing water from our springs.
Yeah, it's very concerning. Let's just put it that way. It's very concerning.
And you also have Salt Springs is another area. We've been going there for, like 30 years, and there used to be fish there, and the water level used to be really high. And now the water level is so low. You go out there and you lay out flat to go swimming, and your hands touch the bottom of the sand because the water level is so low.
Yeah. We've looked at water as an infinite resource, and it just isn't. It simply isn't.
Why is the water going down inland and going up in the oceans? Why is that?
Because, there's a whole lot of difference between fresh water, which is only like 4% of all water on Earth is fresh water that we can drink. And thankfully, we've got a lot of it because of our topography. We've historically had a lot of it. But when you have a lot of agricultural operations and they're getting bigger, and they're drawing water out and using it, you have human population growth. Every human uses, maybe 100, I don't know how many gallons of water a day. That depletes the resource. So we've really, and I don't know what the answer is. This is kind of above my pay grade, but, if we don't solve and be forward thinking on our water supply, we are really going to be in trouble.
It sounds like the problems that with Lake Okeechobee, just getting back down to there, it sounds like the decision to channel it were I don't want to say with good intentions, but for what they believed would benefit the people who live there, maybe for jobs or for something of that nature. And maybe, I guess, to give benefit of the doubt, and you can tell me if that's not true if it isn't, but I'm just wondering, is that what happened? They just thought, well, this is a good way to have farms here, to have sugar and everything else. And it turned out they didn't see the damage it would cause.
I think, yeah. And, it's like anything in this life. It's politics and lobbying. I mean, it's whose back is getting scratched. And I would like to think that they really didn't think this would have a negative impact on Lake Okeechobee and therefore the Everglades. I mean, the other thing that happened was, of course, they built this enormous dike around Lake Okeechobee and the Hoover Dike. And because there was major hurricane and major flooding in the 1920s, and a lot of people lost everything they had. So they thought, well, we'll just containerize this and make it into a big pond.
Right.
But what happened when they did that was all of that water for many, many generations was slowly flowing into the Everglades, and now it wasn't. And so the Everglades started changing drastically. And so now we're trying to move more water south, but it's got to be clean, of course. And that's why you're getting these discharges that are, destroying these river systems. The Caloosahatchee River going into the Gulf of Mexico, and the Indian River into the Indian River Lagoon. When the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, there's a lot of rain in South Florida, and they're worried about the dike of the dam breaking. They have to get rid of that water, and it's all highly polluted water. And so they have a discharge, and more than likely, everything that's in the path of the discharge is going to die. And
that goes on to preserving historical sites. You're an advocate for preserving that, as well as Civil War battlefields.
Yeah, that also. I'm glad you brought that up. That also is what this Land and Water Conservation Fund money does. It's Gettysburg Battlefield. I believe Olustee Battlefield outside of Lake City was helped with this to retain our sense of history and where we come from. I think is very important.
And we're even doing that in our own community. We're rebuilding the Fort King in our own community.
Kidding.
Yeah. So it's really it's 3/4 scale, but they're rebuilding the fort with the buildings inside, and it's going to be really nice.
Well, I tell you, this is way off topic, but if you ever go down to the Dade massacre site, it's in Bunnell.
Yes, we've been there.
Yeah, well, the place where, the story is that Chief Micanopy killed Major Dade. And the little town of Micanopy is named for Micanopy, of course, but and Dade County is named for Dade. But that the spot where Dade died is always cold. And I don't know if this is but I have actually put my hand there, and I probably made myself think this, but it's still kind of cold. So you
really? You got to do that next time we're there. Wow.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, that is the cold spot.
That's right. Wow. I went to the website, and I'm in the process while you and Robin are talking. I am filling out the form that will send a letter to somebody. I don't know who is, but this sounds. You made it easy for us. In other words, didn't you? All I have to do is go to the website.
Yes, sir. That'd be great.
And I'm doing it right now. I'm filling in my information here.
So how about the communities that are building, like our county, Marion County? We're building more homes within the county, and that's disturbing the wildlife, like the coyotes and the raccoons. We've seen more of them just kind of like being displaced. How do we preserve them?
Well, you got to protect the land. I mean, that's what it comes down to in this state. There's about 29% of the land is protected, and that seems like a lot, and it is. But the growth is coming, and they're anticipating by, I think, 2035 we'll have 35 million people here.
Wow.
I'm sorry. Is it possible to tell us what would happen if this doesn't get extended? The website has a countdown clock: 48 days, 14 hours, 4 minutes, and 44 seconds right now. So what happens if when the clock runs out, they decide they're not going to continue it? What will we say?
Well, that money that has for the past 50 years in a bipartisan way has been going to these projects. And it's not just in Florida. It's, any place you travel that has wonderful natural resources, you get to enjoy them too. Then that will be terminated. It will be over. It'll be sunsetted.
Oh my God.
And unless there's another effort made by future Congresses to reinitiate it, then it'll be over. And I just personally think it's just a great thing. It doesn't cost the taxpayers anything, and it saves property for a higher quality of life in our state and every other state.
Wow.
It creates jobs too.
On the website.
Yeah, millions of jobs.
For the listeners, I just want to say the website has everything. You click on a state, it'll give you some of the features of the state that'll be affected by it if we don't continue this. We made it real easy. A lot of times you say, well, write to your congressman, and maybe, I don't know, a small percentage of people maybe actually do. But you made it easy. I already just sent a letter. I mean, I did a brief run through in my mind what the letter said. I didn't read the whole thing in detail. I trust you. And I clicked on the thing and sent it. So there's one more name on that list.
Thank you so much. So I think I've got it here in front of me. But basically, all people need to do is go into National Wildlife Federation, Land and Water Conservation Fund.
Okay, can I tell you the website they gave me? Because this is the one I'm using. It's lwcfcoalition.org, although .com works also, by the way.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, lwcfcoalition.com is what I've got. Yeah.
Yes. And that works, and that's where you can take action, and it says take action to hashtag save LWCF, and that's where the letter is that I signed. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. We need to, I'm getting older, and life has gone by very fast for me, but we need to think about future Floridians.
Absolutely.
And this is one, and our children, if we've got any, and our grandchildren. I've got both, and I'd like to, them to have the wonderful experiences I've had, and if we need to be proactive in protecting these special places, and this is one way to do it.
I want to tell you a 30-second history of Robin and myself. We, in a different time, were a children's act called Robin and the Giant, and we had a song that we wrote called Forests Green, and the first line of the song says, "All I want is a world to pass on to the children as green as the world passed on to me."
Wow.
Because we're 63 years old. We're old too. And I remember when I was a kid, even in New York, I mean, things were great. things got worse as I got older, and I think they're starting to turn back around now in that area. But this part of the country, it would be a shame if we allowed that to happen here.
Absolutely.
Thank you for what you're doing. This is a hard job that you're doing to try to convince people to write to their congressman, and the website makes it easy.
Well, thank you. And I will tell you, just on any issue, I am delighted, whether it be environmental or anything else people care about. I'm a big fan of people get involved because that's what makes a democracy.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I will tell you, such a small percentage of people actually participate in their own democracy that one letter probably equals 100 people think that way.
Well, there you go.
About one.
Yeah. That's a good way to think of it, Preston. Thank you for the work you're doing. This is outstanding. I admire what you're doing, and I realize how hard it is. You talk to us. You got us to sign. I'm sure Robin will do the same, and I'm sure some of our listeners will. Some will write their own letters, by the way.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
And P.S. When you talk to a talk show, the talk show listener is so involved in the government and in politics that this is a great listening audience to be talking to. Preston Roberts, thank you so much for being on the air with us today.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it. Y'all take care.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Fox News Radio. I'm Chris Foster.
There's a lot of very corrupt things that are happening in the White House, and I am going to blow the whistle on a lot of this.
Former White House advisor Omarosa Manigault-Newman has now released 2 secretly recorded tapes, one of her getting fired by President Trump's chief of staff, John Kelly, and this morning on the Today Show, of the president on the phone with her expressing surprise about the firing.